In 1954, as the world lay covered by a veil of impending nuclear doom, the US military rushed to develop protective technology to shield the nation in case the Soviet Union decided to unleash their nuclear arsenal on them. One of the most significant fears the US authorities had was in regards to Russian long-range nuclear bombers. Thus, they hastily approved hundreds of aircraft designs to provide the country with a wide array of long-range interceptors and contain a possible Soviet air attack. The North American XF-108 Rapier was one of the models intended to protect US territory from a nuclear onslaught. The aircraft was specifically designed to intercept incoming bombers when they were still hundreds of miles away from US shorelines. For this purpose, the fighter had to showcase unprecedented speed and range capabilities. However, even when the urgency couldn't be more pressing, the Rapier would take years to perfect, and time was quickly running out. By February 15, 1954, a renowned aviation magazine published an article describing new Soviet jet bombers capable of delivering a nuclear warhead from their bases to the US without a need for refueling. Then, in a Soviet aircraft demonstration, 28 bombers named Mach M4 were presented to the world. American tacticians calculated that if the USSR could produce 28 of them in such a reduced window of time, they would have over 800 bombers by 1960. By then, there would be no force on Earth capable of stopping such an amount of nuclear-armed bombers, and the US Air Force hoped projects like the North American XF-108 Rapier could be developed in time to stand a chance against such an assault. But unbeknownst to the US commanders, the North American XF-108 Rapier was doomed from the start. Uncontrolled panic. The Cold War was defined by the constant fear of mutually assured destruction. As the concerns intensified, US and Soviet forces realized that the only way to dissuade the other side from a nuclear attack was to have such an overwhelming nuclear arsenal themselves that retaliation would mean utter destruction. Soon, the two nations had enough firepower to completely eradicate life on Earth several times over. If one of the two global powers let their guard down and lost the nuclear race, they could be obliterated. With such high stakes, it's no wonder that US authorities panicked when Aviation Week published information outlining the new Mach M4 Bison and its capabilities. Rumored to be able to reach the US mainland and drop nuclear bombs at supersonic speeds, the revolutionary Soviet aircraft was leaving the US behind in the atomic race. The rumors of the mighty Soviet aircraft were so daunting that they were publicly debated in Congress. Adding to the concerns was an infamous event in July of 1955. At the Soviet Aviation Day demonstrations at the Tushino airfield, 10 Bison flew past the reviewing stand just to turn around off-camera and fly by again, with the addition of 8 more bombers. It is unknown if deceit was the objective of such a maneuver, but the Western powers believed the Soviets had built 28 Mach M4 Bison jets by then. If that rate continued, some analysts contended that the Soviets would have 800 nuclear bombers by 1960. Considering that scenario led to the infamous bomber GAP, the idea that Soviet long-range nuclear aircraft technology had far surpassed its American counterpart. If something wasn't done immediately in response, the US could be destroyed. Consequently, the US Air Force began a massive and unprecedented aircraft developing program. The objective was not only to bolster the number of US nuclear bombers, but also to develop state-of-the-art supersonic interceptors capable of disabling incoming Soviet aircraft. The North American XF-108. In an attempt to develop and test a wide range of possible bomber solutions, the US Air Force developed the North American XF-108, shared its engine development with the North American XB-70 Valkyrie strategic bomber program, and implemented several aspects of previous interceptor prototypes. Formal development of the North American XF-108 began on July 20th, 1955. The capabilities the bomber required were clearly established from the beginning. It was to have a 2-man crew, at least 2 jet engines, and needed to fly at a height of at least 60,000 feet while maintaining a speed of Mach 1.7, or 1,122 miles per hour. In addition, to intercept Soviet bombers as far away from American soil as possible, the XF-108 required a range of 1,000 miles without refueling. The aircraft was designed to house a fire control computer that would be able to predict the trajectory of fast-moving targets to ensure the highest possible accuracy. The weapon system was to be loaded with enough firepower so that the XF-108 could bring down 3 bombers on a single run. On October 11, 1955, 3 aviation developers were tasked with the preliminary studies needed to fulfill the Air Force's orders. They were North American Aviation, Lockheed, and Northrop. Of the 3 proposals, the one presented by North American Aviation was deemed the most capable. However, the project had to be suddenly halted in 1956 due to budget issues and political unrest. Finally, North American Aviation was allowed to continue developing 2 prototypes a year later. The overall design went through several significant modifications and adjustments during the construction of the models. The main issue for North American was working with cutting-edge technology while juggling the constant changes the U.S. Air Force asked for. However, the evolution turned out to be highly beneficial to the projected capabilities of the Interceptor. For starters, the speed projections increased from the original Mach 1.7 all the way to Mach 3, or over 2,000 miles per hour. To achieve Mach 3 speeds, the Interceptor would be fitted with 2 powerful General Electric J93 turbojet engines, which would later be used by the XF-108 sister plane, the North American XB-70 Valkyrie bomber. The aircraft fuselage was modified into a prominent delta wing shape. There were various stabilizers on the wings and a tall, all-moving vertical tail fin, supplemented by 2 vertical stabilizers that protracted as the landing gear withdrew. The design changes to the aircraft's exterior were essential to maintain Mach 3 speeds while also reaching a range of over 1,000 miles. The adjustments not only made the craft more aerodynamic, but also provided more storage room for fuel within the wings and hull. Still, speed and range were not the only features that made the XF-108's design groundbreaking. The Interceptor was also intended to carry the Hughes AN/ASG-18 radar, the first pulse Doppler radar set to be used in military aircraft. The radar system was coupled with an infrared search and tracking array on the wings, and the radar was used to guide the Hughes GAR-9 fire control air-to-air missile weaponry, 3 of which would be installed on a revolving launcher inside an internal weapons bay. The GAR-9 system was as innovative as it was large, and it was unparalleled at tracking long-range targets that moved at high speeds. The projectiles launched by the weapons system were intended to reach Mach 6 speeds, or 4,600 miles per hour. No matter how fast an incoming bomber was moving, the North American XF-108 would be able to intercept it and destroy it. Not meant to be. Ironically, the same international pressures that originated the need for the North American XF-108's creation were the ones that determined its ending. By 1959, the XF-108 was still undergoing rigorous adjustments and modifications, and the U.S. Air Force started to lose interest in the project. In reality, it had become clear for U.S. commanders that the nuclear race was moving away from the development of bomber planes and into intercontinental ballistic missiles. In addition, new information had come to light, revealing the bomber gap to be completely false and based on rumors. The Soviets did not have the capabilities to build hundreds of long-range bomber planes, and the Myasishchev M4 Bisons already built were found to be vastly overrated. As it turned out, the Bisons performed far below expectations, and they could not reach the range presented by prior reports. In other words, as impressive as their design was, they could not reach the US from their Russian bases, and they did not represent a significant threat to the country's national security. The Soviet Union, which had terrified Western powers so significantly with the unveiling of their M4 bombers, was forced to use the fearsome aircraft for maritime reconnaissance and other supporting roles. Later, in the 1970s and 1980s, the once daunting machines were repurposed as tankers to refuel other, more useful bombers. As the American military industry moved on to develop defensive and offensive missile weapon systems, the XF-108's development was finally canceled on September 23, 1959. Regrettably, the whole operation was halted, despite the project's excellent progression. Still, the Cold War scare wasn't over, and the transition to intercontinental ballistic missiles just became a new source of panic, from bomber raids to missile strikes. Then, in 1961, the world would discover how frightening the new technology could be as the Cuban Missile Crisis unraveled. As for the Rapier Interceptor, although some design aspects of the XF-108 would later be used in designing and developing other aircraft models, the fearsome example would never fly. As powerful as it could have been, it was never meant to be. Thank you for watching my video. If you like history-inspired content and warfare documentaries, Make sure to subscribe to all of our Duck Documentaries channels, where we constantly publish new and exciting videos. And don't forget to leave us your thoughts in the comment section below.